Hello, this is Abhishek Sengupta. Welcome to my video channel once again. Today, I'll talk about funding. If you remember, in my last few videos, I talked about various aspects of startups. Now, funding is also an important aspect. Once your prototype and the fine line of your product is done, you have to go for mass production. Now, mass production requires fund. Unless and until you are quite confident with self-funding, you have to go for funding. However, there is a second option. If you can manage your expenses with the advances from your client, you might not require funding at all. This situation is generally possible in service sector. However, in production, where you require to set up the factories, machineries, etc., you require funding. Now, you have to first assess whether you require funding or you don't require funding. If you require funding, then only you go for that, because you remember, whenever you take funding, that becomes a responsibility for you, because you cannot just live with the funding whatever you are getting. You have to return it back. So remember, fund whatever you receive is a responsibility for you. Now, you require proper planning for funding. The reason being, if you are absolutely haphazard with the planning, then funding might not be that effective, and the reason why you are taking the funds may also require a lot of workout. You need thorough planning before you opt for funding. First and foremost, the first point which you need to work out: why do you require funding? What are the aspects of your startup journey which will require funding? Those all need to be properly noted and completely brainstormed. The second is how much fund you require. The exact quantum of fund which you require need to be ascertained first. Third is, what do you do with the fund? Your action plan has to be ready. Number 4 is contract for funding. Whenever you are opting for funding, a right contract need to be executed. Number 5 is return of funding. Whenever you get funding, remember, the funding is your responsibility. So whenever you get a funding, you should have a plan ready for return of funding to the investor. Sources of funding. Now, there are various sources of funding available in the market today. So you have to pick up the right source depending on your requirement. The first source is self-funding, where you are funding your own company. This is the best way of funding, but at all if it is possible. Second is family funding. There are many cases where the people get the money from the different family member. It can be your father, your elder brother, it could be elders of your family, etc., etc. But remember, whenever you are taking the family funding step, you have to keep your term sheet absolutely crystal clear with the right clauses in place. Next comes banks. Banks are one of the most preferred form of traditional funding. The bank gives the funding depending on the eligibility. The worth of your company determines the quantum of loan you will be sanctioned, and the return of the funding will happen in form of EMIs. Next is financial companies. There are many non-banking financial companies which are there in the market, which will offer loan at a relatively easier clauses or terms and conditions. And there are two other new age funding options. One is angel funding, second is venture capital. Remember, whenever you are going for any kind of funding, you need to have the right term sheet in place. The proper term sheet need to be negotiated, it has to be properly signed, and it has to be a written document between you and your investor. And remember, you have to make a proper payment, rather repayment plan. This has to be properly chalked out, agreed by the both parties. Next is how you can get your company ready for funding. Number 1, amongst that is you should have a proper company. By proper means you should have a registered company. It should be either in form of LLP, in form of private limited or limited companies, because these increase your credibility. Number two is right idea. You should have a right idea to pitch for in front of your investors. So whenever you plan for a fundraising exercise, you should have a right idea, a properly developed, properly written, well defined and well brainstormed idea. Then it should be presented in front of the investor. Number three is scalability provision. Your company or your idea should have a scalability provision. Your idea should be scalable, your company should be scalable. Next is right company structure. Your company should be structured properly. Right structuring of the company is important because this again increases the credibility. Next is the refund plan. So whenever you are taking an investment, your refund or return plan of action should be absolutely ready with you. Apart from this, there are few other points also which you need to keep it in mind. Number one is you have to brainstorm this process pretty well. Which type of funding you will go for, it has to be properly defined, it has to be brainstormed, it has to be properly thought of. If you are unable to do so, take an expert help. Decide on the equity allocation. Now, at times, the investors look for equity in lieu of the investing. So this has to be done very, very precisely, because once you allocate equity in favor of investor, he or she becomes a co-owner. Next is you have to take all your stakeholders into confidence. In a company, there are many stakeholders. So you have to remember, before you go for a fundraising exercise, you have to take all the stakeholders in confidence. Next is right selection of investors. In every field there are good and bad people. Likewise, while you are going for a fundraising exercise, you have to take the right choice of the investor. Right investors can help you grow, whereas wrong investors can doom your business. Next is value addition. Now, whenever you are doing a fundraising exercise, you have to add a minimum value to your company. So, a funding is a useless exercise unless and until there is a value addition in your company. Now, fund given is a responsibility to owners. So, the repayment of the funding as per agreed term is your responsibility as a startup owner. So, remember, it is a very complicated process. Utmost care need to be taken for this. Now next come, what does an investor look for? Number one is right concept. Your concept has to be clear, scalable and rightly organized. Next is integrity. Integrity of a startup owner is of utmost importance. If an investor gets a mild touch or mild sense about integrity issue of an owner, the chance you are going to lose. Next is right organization structure. Your company should have right organization structure. Next is good corporate governance. Right corporate governance should be there in each and every company. Better the governance, more lucrative the company gets in front of the investor. Next, product should be a solution to a problem. The right solution makes the right product. Hence, your product or the service, whichever you are offering, should be of right nature. Next is scalability. Your company or your business concept should be scalable, because with scalability, profitability of the company increases and it makes your credit or makes your credibility better in front of an investor. That's all for today, and if you have any question, write on the comment, or you can ping me on my social media as well. I'll be back with more such kind of videos. Till then, stay connected, stay tuned. Do not forget to subscribe, share and like.